Welcome back to the Raising Rock podcast. I'm Elise Orozco, and I am your host. We are in for a riveting conversation today. We have Katy Faust from Them Before Us on the podcast. She's also the author of Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City, and she is a powerhouse. When I think of courage, I think of her. She is so intelligent, and she is really using her voice to make change. She is single-handedly spearheading an effort to reverse gay marriage. She is very outspoken about IVF and how it violates the rights of children. Yes, I said the rights of children. We dive into what are children's rights and what does that mean? What do our children have a right to besides the right to life? She answers that question and so much more. We dive into topics that we need to be discussing with our children to focus on conserving the values that America was built on. That's where the idea of raising conservative kids in a woke city came from. She walks us through how to have those conversations, some of the ones that were the most difficult for her to have in her own parenting journey. And she is truly one of the smartest people I've ever spoken to. She's so articulate. She knows IVF and humans' rights and children's rights and gay marriage and all of these tricky topics like the back of her hand, and has a way of articulating her views on them, what our views should be on them. She does such an incredible job articulating that and really equipping us as parents with the language that we need to either articulate it to our children, or if they're not of the age where it's appropriate for these topics to be articulated to them, how to articulate it to one another and defend our position and defend our beliefs. If it comes up at Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas, you will be armed with the language to use to defend your beliefs and to defend children's rights. So you are in for a treat. Get out a pen and paper and a notepad and start taking notes on what she discusses. Go follow her on Instagram, follow her on her Substack. At the end of the episode, she'll walk you through anywhere you can find her, how you can get involved. She is a fascinating person to follow. I strongly encourage you to follow her and get to know what she's doing. If this episode encourages you, if you're encouraged by Raising Rock, the podcast in general, would you pause this episode and would you take a few moments to leave a comment, like, subscribe, follow us on Instagram if you haven't already. That's Raising Rock CO on Instagram, as in Raising Rock Company, Raising Rock CO. Any comment, any follow, any like, any subscribe, anything helps us become more discoverable to a new audience, and it really does help us with the show. We are so thankful you are here. You will love Katy Faust and everything that she has to say. You might be a little triggered by some of the things she says. I encourage you, push through, listen, be open-minded, because it really is such good and powerful information. Thanks for being here today. And Katy Faust, welcome to the Raising Rock podcast. We're so glad you're here. Katy, thank you so much for joining the podcast. We are so excited you're here.
Great to be with you. I love rock. I love that premise, and especially courage. I think that there's lots of messages about be kind to the exclusion of courage and truth. And so maybe there's some places where kids don't need it as much, but I feel like that is the thing that is missing. And it's probably missing because they haven't seen their parents be very courageous in some ways. So it's really hard to become courageous if you're not beholding people who are courageous. So anyway, it's a good lesson for all of us parents to do a good job of doing the right thing, even when it's unpopular, and then letting our kids watch how we handle it, and then knowing that they can go and do likewise.
Absolutely. I'm so thankful you brought that up. Yes, it is hard to be courageous. And something that I talk about often is, hey, we want to instill these values in our kids. These character traits matter. But if we don't first have them, our children aren't going to take us seriously if we're trying to model those behaviors for them. So I think you bring up a really great point. You are certainly a model of courage. When I think of courage in culture, I think of someone like you are it. Talk to us a little bit about Them Before Us and what you're doing and how courage has shaped your life and your platform?
I'm not courageous by default. I'm courageous against my will. And like when the whole marriage debate started heating up right after President Obama evolved on the topic in 2012, I felt like I needed to start speaking out because the messages that the pro-gay marriage camp was using advanced ideas about marriage and family that were detrimental and destructive for children, that children don't need a mother and father, that kids with two moms or two dads fare just as well, which means kids don't need their mom and dad, which is one of the biggest lies. Like, other than children have a right to life, children having a right to their own mother and father is probably the secondary most essential aspect of understanding the child and guarding their thriving, their dignity, and their future well-being. So I got into it because of that, but I didn't do it under my own name. I did it under an anonymous blog because I didn't want to take the heat. I didn't want the blowback. I didn't want people to target me or my kids or my family or my church or anything like that. So for a couple of years, I just blogged anonymously because I felt like I needed to say something and do something, but I didn't want the personal blowback. I ended up being like outed by a really powerful gay blogger who did try to make me pay, like doxed the members of my church to get me to stop. And thankfully, because the men of my church have spine, they're just like, I think you should just keep going. So then I did some public speaking on my own and founded Them Before Us in 2018 to combat all of these different areas where children are being victimized in matters of marriage and family, whether it's the definition of marriage or rampant no-fault divorce or the rise of unchecked reproductive technologies that treat children as designer products, to adult-centric adoption, to the rise of polyamory and polygamy, to spiking rates of cohabitation, to who goes on a child's birth certificate. All of these things ultimately come down to, are you going to recognize who children are and protect them, or are you going to victimize them? So if it has to do with marriage and family, I have an opinion on it, and our work is going to try to bring the child's perspective into that conversation and advocate on their behalf. So that's what Them Before Us is all about.
When I first started listening to you, I knew that I wasn't in support of IVF. I knew I wasn't in support of surrogacy. I knew I wasn't in support of divorce and all these things that, to your point, negatively impact the child. But I had never heard someone articulate it in a way that it violated children's rights. So you talked about a children's right to life. What other rights do you believe children have that adults are selfishly prioritizing themselves over?
We try to be really careful at Them Before Us to not call just anything a right. We are going to operate from the natural rights lexicon. Natural rights is a philosophical system that helps you discern and understand the oughts, what we ought to do, not based on special revelation found in Scripture, but based on general revelation, what can be observed by looking at the world around us, specifically the nature of man and the realities, the biological realities of what it means to be human. So based on that philosophical system, obviously we have a right to life. This, by the way, is the reason why our founders arrived at the Bill of Rights. You have these specific rights endowed by your creator, and then it should be protected by government. It's not granted by government. So when we talk about children's rights, we're not just talking about something that anybody really wants, which you'll find that especially in matters of marriage and family, anything an adult really wants, they will conveniently frame as a right, like a right to choose or a right to marry or a right to parenthood or even a right to government-funded birth control. There's all kinds of non-rights that are still very important, but that are not natural rights. And so we just feel like it's really important to say what is and is not a natural. And in our first book, Them Before Us, my co-author Stacey Manning and I outlined the 3 rules that make it a right test so that you can know whether or not something actually is a natural. And those 3 criteria are: it exists pre-government. The government didn't give it to you. They're there to protect it. Nobody has to provide it for you. If you have to go to 12 years of medical school to be able to afford the kind of care that you need, you don't have a right to that care. And number 3, everybody has it in equal measure. It doesn't vary in degrees like a GED or a PhD. Education is not a right. According to that definition, children have a right to life. It exists pre-government. No one has to provide it for you, and everyone gets the same amount. And children have a right to their mother and father. It exists pre-government. if you exist, your parents also exist. Nobody has to provide them for you, and everybody has the same amount, exactly two. So you can debate about other kinds of natural rights that children have. I think because of the nature of the threats coming against children, we actually do need to develop a new list of defenses of natural rights for children. Things like they have a right to an intact, unmedicalized body by the time they get to be 18. They have a right to innocence, to have their innocence protected rather than stolen through pornography that is being channeled directly into their pockets via cell phones, or protection from sexually explicit material given to them by their third grade librarian. Children do have fundamental natural rights. Strangely, we're in this place where we're going to have to defend and articulate those in ways that previous generations have not, because our culture, the progressive ideology, has gone so far. And unfortunately, they target our kids with most of it.
So much there. I am at a loss of where to go because you bring up so much. I love that you called out a children's right to innocence. I care so much about what my children are exposed to. I'm vigilant, which is part of the reason I've been so enamored with your content and your book, which we're going to cover here in a second, Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City. Their innocence is so important to me. And our culture doesn't seem to care. I did a reel a couple days ago. I was watching the Dodger-Brewer playoff game with my children, and this wasn't pornographic, but there was an HBO Max commercial on called Face Your Demons, and demonic images were on the screen during a baseball game. I'm like, where have our standards gone to protect our children? It's not like we were watching HBO. We were watching a baseball game. It blows my mind that people don't prioritize the innocence of children anymore. How far our society has gone downhill.
And it's not even that they don't prioritize it. They actually see it as their duty to undo that innocence. Like that innocence, it gets in the way of what adults want from children. It's like there's an adult benefit to children being sexualized at an early age or desensitized to adult-themed content at an early age. It is good for the adults or the industry or the predators, or as used as a wedge to separate parents from their children through school counselors or radical teachers. It is an indoctrination tool, right, to separate children from their parents by introducing adult-themed material outside of the parent-child relationship. And so it's very purposeful. And in fact, they would see that this is actually a critical theory strand, right? Critical theory just pits one group against another, always deems one group as oppressed and one as oppressor. So there's actually a critical theory as relates to parents and children, where the parents are the oppressors and the children are the oppressed. And working to wrest children from the control of their parents is seen as this act of liberation. In that sense, like targeting children by destroying their innocence and actually having a separate adult that is not their parents introduce that content to them, in some spheres of academia is considered a form of liberation. So it's good to target children. It's good to get these disturbing themes in front of them sooner rather than later and circumvent the parent in doing it. So it's not just where have our standards gone, we're not protecting kids. There's actually forces that are targeting kids. Drag queens are not going to nursing homes to read to children. They're going to libraries during toddler reading hour, like for a reason. So even if they're not consciously going, oh, this is a thread of critical theory, it all has the same outcome, which is corrupt children's innocence, specifically to have them latch onto adults who are not their parents, who can then give them further grooming and indoctrination into this subject.
Unbelievable. We are in California, and so all over the news, Instagram right now is AB 495. AB 4, I would assume you're knowing.
This is forgive me if I'm getting it wrong, but this is the supposed, hey, there's an emergency, the parents might be taken away by ICE, and so now they can have a separate parent come and say, hey, I'm actually the caregiver, I can take them away from the house and completely abscond and virtually kidnap them, even though that adult had not been known to school authorities in the past and may not be genetic related and don't have any kind of background check or anything like that. It's just like state-sanctioned kidnapping. Is that the one?
Bingo, you hit the nail on the head and described it perfectly well. And it is not written just for people who are being deported. It is so ambiguously written that I don't have my children in school. They're homeschooled. But if I did have my children in school, anybody could go in and with a form that took 8 minutes to be filled out could remove my child. How does that violate children's rights?
The reason why children have a right to their own mother and father. So children don't have a right to a mother and father. They have a right to their mother and father. Just like you, when you left the hospital with your children, you didn't want a child. You wanted your child. There was something special about the child that you gave birth to and that your husband probably, I assume, contributed the sperm for.
Yes.
You guys wanted that child for a reason. And natural law says you actually have a claim to that child that you don't have to any other child. And from the parent's perspective, we're like, duh, of course, I don't just want any child. But when you look at it from the child's perspective, they don't just want any adult. They actually have a right and a claim to go home with the two adults responsible for their existence. So we understand it from a very self-interested, stay away from my kids. But if kids could talk, they'd say, stay away from my parents. I want those two adults. So the reason why there is a pre-political right to your own children to direct their education, their care, and their upbringing, there's actually sociological support for this. And that is because you, the mom and dad, are statistically the most connected to, invested in, and protective of your child. There's a benefit you are going to bring to your children that no other adult, no state-assigned adult, right? No adult who has contracted that baby to be created through surrogacy, no adult that fills out the eight-minute paperwork to abscond with them. There's something specific about a child's own mother and father that gives something to them that no other adult can give them. It is a relationship that can't be swapped out. And I say this as an adoptive mom who believes that adoption is a redemptive institution when it's properly understood as child-centric. But even I will say, there's some things that my child has lost that I can't fully compensate for. So why is it that it's so important that we guard not just parental rights to their own children, but children's right to their own parent? It's because there are benefits to that biological mother and father that other adults cannot give them. So what are those benefits? The first one is a child's own mother and father are the most likely to make sure they're safe and loved. Statistically, risk of abuse and neglect will drastically increase when other adults are involved in raising the child or even just living in the home. That is why adoptive parents like me have to undergo months of screening and vetting and background checks. Number two, if a child is raised by their own mother and father, they have access to their biological identity. It is very easy for a child to answer the question, who am I? When they can easily answer the question, whose am I? Like, we get a lot of information about our identity by being connected to our own mom and dad. And adoptees and sperm donor, egg donor conceived children very often struggle with their identity. Interestingly, sperm and egg donor kids much more so than adoptees. So there is this component of identity consolidation that is facilitated when you're raised in your natural family. And the third is, if children are being raised by their mother and their father, the two people responsible for their existence, they get the perfect gender balance in the home 100% of the time. They get the masculine love and the feminine love that maximizes child development. And two women just don't do the same thing for a child. Two men are never going to be able to develop the child's fine motor skills the way that a mother does. Two men don't have the same kind of responsiveness to an infant cry that a female parent does. So there are benefits to guarding the nuclear family, especially from the child's perspective. That is so far the best recipe that humanity has discovered to figure out how to really lead children to the place where they're safe, loved, developmentally intact in terms of an identity, solid and secure, and to the point where they can thrive later on in life. So how ridiculous to think that someone can sign a piece of paper and say, I am now going to co-opt this child, even though I can offer that kid none of the benefits. In the extreme case, maybe safety if the biological parents are abusive, but we've got an entire system in this country to intervene in those extreme cases. And sometimes it's still hard to wrest the child away from abusive biological parents. So whenever possible, we have to respect that natural bond between parent and child, and we put children in grievous, dangerous situations when we disregard it.
Absolutely. We're seeing a lot in the news about Trump and IVF and all these changes that are going to be happening with insurance. And I think I had hoped that he'd forgotten about that promise. I'm like, we're a year in, maybe he forgot. He did not forget, and it seems to be happening. Talk to my audience who might not be aware of IVF and its corruption and what the problems are with IVF. Talk to us like we're 5 and we don't understand IVF.
There's no problem with IVF if what the adults want is the most important question in the equation. Because all kinds of adults are going to have their desires met with IVF. People who are dealing with infertility, people that are single and don't have a partner, same-sex couples, thruples, convicted felons, foreign nationals. There's all kinds of people that can benefit from having a lab-created baby, which, by the way, when you're making a baby in a laboratory, it's just as easy to use somebody else's egg or somebody else's sperm or both. So of the 90,000 children born through IVF every year, our best estimate is that 1/3 to 2/3 of them are going to lose their mother or father in the process. But those 90,000...
Hold on for a second. Are you saying that 1/3 to 2/3 of the babies actually born of IVF, there's a chance that their mom or dad thinks that it's their biological child, but it might actually not be? Is that what you're saying?
We do have cases of IVF mix-ups, lots of cases, where they're like, sorry, we implanted the wrong embryo. No, what I mean is in 1/3 to 2/3 of cases, the commissioning parents are not the biological parents. Or if there is a couple, like a same-sex couple or a heterosexual couple, maybe they purchased sperm or they purchased eggs because she's 43 and her eggs aren't viable anymore. So it's his sperm, it's a 22-year-old Yale student's egg that they implant into the mother's womb, the intended mother's womb, but the child is going to lose a biological relationship with their own genetic mother. So it's a mix
tell
and
me
match.
like I'm 5. I showed why I need you to explain it like I'm 5.
There's a lot going on in the world of big fertility that we don't know about because unlike adoption, unlike organ donation, unlike any other medical practice, there's really no requirement to share, track, study, do long-term follow-ups on what we're doing with these women where we're hyperstimulating their ovaries and extracting their eggs and subjecting these children to years or decades of frozen storage, swapping children out. Entire embryos are being traded. We're making babies in a laboratory, and we're really not doing a lot of follow-up on the impact that it has on the kids or even the adults that are involved in that. So what I'm giving you is our best estimate that those 90,000 children that are born alive, the truth is they represent maybe 2 to 3% of the lab-made babies that are being created across the nation. That means that the vast majority of children made in a laboratory will never be born alive. Probably 90% will never even be implanted. They will be deemed unworthy of life and discarded. They will not make the grade. They grade embryos based on fitness, and the ones that have a poor grade will be discarded. Unrelated, unwanted embryos, surplus embryos, they'll be frozen forever. They'll be donated to research. We're researching on these little lives up to about 3 weeks and then discarding them. And maybe the fortunate ones will be donated to some other adult. And these donations, this is not adoption. These are going to children that are going to be raised by total strangers who didn't undergo the background checks and the screening that traditional adoptive parents did. It is a marketplace of humans. That's what's happening in the world of big fertility. And even if you're like, okay, at least they're alive, the answer is the vast majority are not. By our best estimates, the baby making industry of IVF destroys probably 4 times the number of little lives than the baby taking industry of abortion. So if you believe that children have a right to life from the moment of conception, you have a greater enemy in IVF than you do in Planned Parenthood.
Unbelievable. And what do you think that making this so accessible to people will do to those numbers? Like, what are we talking about here? Because right now it's only available to the wealthy or the people that can afford to take out a loan or a parent funds it, whatever. But when it's available to the masses, what are we going to see?
Yeah, just more human rights abuses. What you incentivize, you get more of, and that's what the Trump administration did. They didn't have a mandate, which was good, but they're working to make a lot of these drugs cheaper and more accessible, which means it will be easier to mass produce little lives, screen them out, destroy them, freeze them forever, trade them, and donate them to research. Making the process cheaper just means more lives are going to be lost and abused in the process.
You've done such a good job of educating your audience and other people's audiences about IVF being a crisis, not because there's groups of people that are just desperate to have a baby and they want to do it. They want to do IVF, but they'll do it the right way. They'll implant all the embryos that are made. They're going to do it all the right way. That does not represent the bulk of what's happening with IVF. What's the bulk? Who's the target customer of IVF?
Big fertility gets a lot of mileage off of you thinking this is just about your sister-in-law who can't have a child, able to create the baby that she desperately wants, and it's going to be her egg and his sperm, and this is their only way to have a child. And that definitely happens. That's a true scenario. For some people, this might be the only chance they have to have a child. It's much more likely that they have undiagnosed infertility issues that could be resolved if they went to a doctor that identified and healed that underlying cause. There's a whole school of medicine called restorative reproductive medicine that actually diagnoses the conditions that are leading to infertility and heals them themselves so the couple can get pregnant on their own. That's not a very lucrative option, and so you're not going to hear it from your medical doctor a lot of the time. But that scenario, that sympathetic scenario, is something that I think a lot of us understand because we know those people. We want them to be parents. They would be wonderful mothers and fathers. But the truth is, once you take reproduction out of the marital embrace, you get everything. You get everything. We don't exactly know how many pedophiles are acquiring children through IVF and surrogacy. We don't know how many children are exactly losing their mother or father in the process to go home with a single parent or a same-sex couple or a heterosexual couple that are purchasing gametes on the open market. And we don't know exactly how many of these children are taken across international borders. We don't know, because the big fertility industry does not have to tell us those things. One of the things that my nonprofit, Them Before Us, does is it offers policy recommendations to state-level lawmakers who would like to protect kids. And we've got several suggestions for how they can curtail the abuses of the IVF industry. One of that is just tell us what you do. Tell us how many children you make. How many of them are frozen? How many of them are discarded? How many of them are sex selected out of existence? How many of them are donated on? How many of them go home with their own genetic mother and father? How many of them are being sold or taken over international borders? How many of them are going home with criminals? Just do some background checks on the people that you are handing these babies over to. Right now, there's no state in the country that asks those kinds of questions. And the times where a state has proposed, hey, we would just like you to disclose what's going on, the big fertility world has an absolute conniption. Because if the world knew what they're really doing with these little lives, I think all of us would say, this does not sound like helping infertile couples have children to me.
Absolutely. What is next for Them Before Us? What are you working on? What's exciting you to get out of bed every morning and tackle the next thing?
We've got several incredible projects that are coming down the pike. One, we have a children's rights database that should be out in the next couple months, where we give every state in the country a grade to say, how much are you protecting children and how much are you victimizing this? This is everything from divorce laws to how they're doing in terms of reproductive technologies, defining parenthood in ways that honor children rather than serve adults. So that's going to be coming out in the next couple months. We have
I'm sure California got a really high grade. I'm sure California did really well on that.
Yeah, Washington State and California are in the dregs. Let's just put it that way. There's a few states that are doing better, but none that are doing great, because especially in the world of reproductive technologies, very few people have the spine to put kids first. So we're going to change that. We also have a page coming out, a website coming out that targets the Human Rights Campaign. They have a massive, very influential index called the Corporate Equality Index that snaps their fingers and corporate America jumps. And so much of the ways that corporate America can get into the good graces of the Human Rights Campaign is by victimizing children, violating their right to life, violating their right to their mother and father, violating their right to an intact, unmedicalized body. So we have a hit piece, in essence, a hit website coming out against them that I'm really excited about because I hate them. I think they're one of the greatest victimizers of children by pushing dangerous ideologies. And I would like them to come toppling down and never to emerge from the dustbin of history again. Just my personal thoughts. We have a documentary that we are co-producing with Focus on the Family that is going to slay. It is so good. And it's going to be out next summer or fall. The big thing I'm working on right now is we are spearheading a coalition to challenge gay marriage and to retake marriage on behalf of children. Gay marriage has victimized children. It has absolutely overhauled our nation's parenthood laws and, in essence, rendered children as functional accessories to be acquired by any adult who has the money and means to contract for them. It is directly connected to gay marriage. You do not get You do not get this kind of child commodification without gay marriage. Amazingly, we've got this national coalition of every major national conservative organization and most conservative media platforms as well, working together to say, you can't have it. You can't have marriage. It's for kids.
How does one even begin to overturn something that this would be country altering, life changing for our children and this next generation? How does one even start that?
You need a judicial strategy that changes the question before the courts, away from should gay marriage be legal to do children have a right to their mother and father? We make them answer a different question. Number two, we change public opinion. We make sure that everybody understands that natural marriage is plan A for child protection, and gay marriage in 100% of cases where it's been legalized across the world leads to child victimization. And number three, you turn the church into a child-centric fighting force and make sure that Christians, Protestant and Catholic, understands that not only do they need to believe what the church teaches or what the Bible says, but they need to be vocal about it because the only alternative is child victimization. So that's the plan.
How can we get involved with that?
You can. Our website is in the works right now, but if you go to endobergefell.com, you can just put in your email and I will tell you everything you need to know when there is more to be found. But definitely follow us on the socials, because when there's more information, basically we're going to completely overtake the cultural space, the legal space, and we're going to fortify churches to speak up about this. It will be everywhere. Give me a few more months.
Oh, Katy, God bless you. That is amazing. So speaking of gay marriage, that is one of the topics, I think, in your book, correct me if I'm wrong, Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City, that was under the LGBTQ chapter. Am I correct on that?
We don't have a chapter on that. What we did in Raising Conservative Kids, I co-wrote this with Stacy. She and I are both in Seattle. We have 7 children between us. They have largely gone to Seattle public schools. Neither of us are from Christian families. So it was just what do you do when everything in culture is lying to your kids? How can you still inculcate a biblical worldview into your kids? And so we did outline, the book is called Raising Conservative Kids in a Woke City, because we are like, here are the ideas, the best ideas from history, biology, and economics that need to be conserved. And then here's how the world is attacking those ideas. So if you're going to raise kids that conserve the best ideas, we were like, here's the ideas that need to be conserved. And so marriage and gender are definitely 2 of those issues that we felt like you needed to fortify your kids about. And then we spend the next few chapters talking about how do you instruct your kids, educate them, and prepare them on those different topics at different ages and stages.
That is what I found so powerful about the book, whether you have your kids in public school or you homeschool or something in between. You have to instill these values in your children, and you have to have a biblical worldview. And there were seasons in my parenting journey, and I'm sure there will be future seasons, where I'm looking for a script. I'm like, okay, this is so far beyond my pay grade and my intelligence level. Give me a script. Walk me through this conversation. And that's what was so powerful about the book, is you could go to a topic and based on age, there was suggested language and a walkthrough of what that looks like. So could you tell my audience a little bit about some of the topics that are covered and just give us an idea of what that framework typically looks like when you're introducing some of these ideas to your children?
Yeah. So it's been a while since I picked up that book, and I'm like, I don't even know if I've got a copy. I think all of my copies are gone. But basically we're like, here, it's all the things that you think you're going to get uninvited to Thanksgiving dinner with your family about. Those are the things that you have to talk to. Yeah, and you know what they are. And it's not just like issues of life that have to do with both the baby taking industry and the baby making industry, but why is life so precious? Why do children have a right to life? Why do we need to protect it? The nature of what it means to be human, which tells us that we're made in the image of God and that we are male and female. And once you understand that, then you can understand the true nature of marriage, that is, from the child's perspective, the only relationship that unites the two people to whom children have a natural. We go on and talk about the importance of religious liberty and freedom of conscience issues, which is also under attack. Why is it so important to be able to have free thought and free inquiry? Because it's foundational to be a free people. We also talk about how like neither Stacy or I are economists. I mean, like her husband's like a master of everything, but like you do have to know enough about capitalism to talk to your children about why it's the foundation for a moral society. You need to talk about the moral goodness of the free market. And that's not something I knew a lot about, but my kids are coming home with socialist talking points and propaganda being shoved in their face. And you need to be able to understand that one of these systems are always connected to a totalitarian, often like genocidal regime, and one of them leads to prosperity and flourishing, that there's something that's moral about the market and you have to get it right. We also talk about the importance of race and understanding a true like human dignifying concept of race, which is that it's not nothing but it's not everything, and like your humanness determines more your value, and race, the color of your skin, very little, right? Very much content of your character kind of thing. But then we also are like, you also have to get the nature of America right. America itself, its founding and its principles are also under attack. That's something that you need to teach your kid early and often and at age appropriate stages. So with all of those different topics, what we did is we laid out this general framework that is largely based on that trivium model of classical educators, grammar, logic, rhetoric. So grammar is like up through the end of elementary school, where you just saturate them in the good, true, and beautiful of all of those subjects. Your goal, while they're in that developmental phase where they sponge up unquestioningly whatever an adult tells them, your goal is to filter out the distortions. You want lots of exposure to good, true, and beautiful. Filter out the twisting of those topics. Then in middle school, that logic phase, you introduce them to the distortions. You make them experts on homosexuality and the different kinds of abortion that are out there and the basics of socialism and the lies about the American founding and what BLM would say about race and all of that. You are the primary educator. Whoever gets to your child first, they will automatically consider the expert on the topic. So they should believe that you are the expert on gay marriage. You are the expert on transgenderism because you talk to them first and you introduce the distortions. And then by the time they get to high school, our opinion is you take a big step back, which is interesting because a lot of people would say, oh, high school is really where the war is. And it is. But by that point, that education phase in when they're 2 years old to the time where they're 10 or 11, that's the good, true, beautiful. And then we call it the equipping phase in middle school, where you're exposing them to the lies. And then in high school, we lean out in terms of we're telling you what to think and do, but we lean way in when it comes to emotional connection, which means as much physical proximity as possible so you can still get those emotional conversations when they come up. So that's the framework that we give. We do think you should hit those major topics that are under attack at all three phases, but it's really like the how you approach it in each of those different kind of triads that we think is the most important.
In your experience with having these conversations with your own children, what topic or maybe a couple topics did you find to be the most difficult, either for you to have or for your child to understand? And how could we maybe learn from where those struggles were?
I don't know. I think probably like the economics was one of the most difficult, just because I didn't feel like I was an exhaustive expert on those kinds of things. So I felt like I need to do a little more work to communicate that in age appropriate ways to the kids as they grew. But it's really interesting because when my oldest was going into 6th grade, nobody was talking about transgenderism. It was all gay marriage. So that is where we really had to push to equip. And then a few years later, it was transgenderism that we really needed to make sure they knew what to do. By the time my second daughter was going back to school after the pandemic, her sophomore year, we had to have the conversations of let's role play. What are you going to do when somebody asks you for your pronouns? Okay, what are the kind of answers that you're going to give? Now it's back to life issues. I think after Dobbs fell, like now pro-life issues are a big deal. I know that my third child has had to make a couple difficult, Stacy's too, had to make the difficult decision of not standing during the Black national anthem at a few of their assemblies because they're like, there is no Black national anthem. There is one anthem. It is for all Americans. And taking the heat for that. My kids have lost friendships over refusing to go along with different conversations or trending topics, Free Palestine kind of related things even recently. So it's like whatever is trending in the news that is anti-good, true, and beautiful is the thing that you need to put all your chips on, because that is the thing where your kids are going to be feeling the cultural heat. It's very hard for them to be courageous or clear if they don't feel like they know what they're talking about. So like we tell our kids by the time they're going into middle school, we expect them to be experts among their friend group. They may not know enough to challenge their teacher or refute a teacher, but their friends should see them as an authority on the topic. Oh, Josh knows a lot more about abortion than I do. Or, oh, Michaela, she's a master when it comes to all those questions about dads and moms. Or Benjamin is, he'll just argue. Benjamin, you don't want to cross him if you're talking about...
I have a Benjamin that argues. That must be like a common Benjamin trait. I also have a Benjamin that argues. He's 5, though.
Oh, you've got only good things ahead of you. Last year, he was at a public school where they said, we just want to let you know that we are not going to be saying Merry Christmas. No one's going to say Merry Christmas. And we just need to make sure that everybody stays safe. And Ben goes, that's a violation of my First Amendment. And she goes, sometimes we can make special accommodations around those kinds of topics if it's a concern about safety. And Ben said, nope, you can't. This isn't something that you have the right to change or limit. And she goes, that's just the rules that the school is making. And he came home and he talked to me and I said, we will destroy them. And I said, but you have to be on very good behavior, because when we challenge them, it needs to be because you are right and not because you've been mean or not because you're being obstinate, or make sure that when we come in to defend you, it is only the truth that I'm having to stand firm on, not because you were not as gracious as you could be on the topic. But by the time he went back to school the next day, the teacher said, I've talked with the administration and you guys are allowed to say Merry Christmas if you want. That's not actually something that we are able to decide for you. So you can make those own decisions. So each kid has that one area where they're like, don't tread on me. But then every new year brings new ways that the left and the progressive ideologues are going to try to capture our kids. So you just have to make them the expert on whatever's trending.
You bring up something really interesting talking about Benjamin and this idea of wanting to empower him to go and fight this battle, but do it graciously with good behavior. I think so many parents, Christians, we have the right perspective, we have the right mission, but we miss the mark on respect and being gracious and doing it with kindness. And I struggle sometimes with how to empower my children. They're young, they're 5 and 8, so they're not being empowered to do a whole lot right now. I struggle with what does it look like to teach them how to stand up for truth, but to do it without disrespecting authority and without being unkind. Like, how have you taught your children how to hold that healthy tension between all of that?
Probably not perfectly. I don't know if either the Manning family or the Faust family have done that perfectly. But the answer is, if they see you doing it, they'll do it. So you do it first. That's the bottom line. You just have to do it first. We always say in that book, you become what you behold. Whatever you're looking at, you're going to become like that. So if you're constantly saying, oh, that stupid libtard, they're going to say libtard. Or if you say, my friends on the left disagree with me about this, they're going to say, my friends on the left disagree with me about this. Whatever you say, they are going to say. It is not what you tell them to say. It is what you say that they are going to say. It is how you behave. So when, somebody says to them, hey, how can you love gay people and be against gay marriage? They go, my mom's mom is in a lesbian relationship and she loves my grandma better than anybody else. Don't even come at me with that possibility that it's an either or situation. You can support traditional marriage and be the person that loves the gay people in your life more than anyone. I can't even entertain. I can laugh at you at that suggestion. Why? Because they've seen their mom do it. They've seen their dad do it. So you just have to demonstrate it for them. You have to demonstrate righteous anger, properly directed. You need to demonstrate for them firm, unflinching disagreement while also being the most beautiful person in the conversation. So you need to figure it out. And that is like the most important thing. And then, of course, they're going to have to test it out for themselves, especially in high school, where they'll come home and they'll say, yeah, I probably didn't need to start that conversation. Because I tell my kids, I don't want you to be an aggressor in those conversations. But if somebody brings the argument to you, you need to finish it. You had better know enough to win the argument, hopefully in a way that will also win the person. But I don't think that it's a great way to go by starting the conversation unasked or unprovoked. But if somebody brings it to you, stand firm, don't move, regardless of how much weeping and gnashing of teeth you may encounter. Try to be the most beautiful person in the conversation so that other people will go. We have this, chapter 9 is all about this. Chapter 9 in Raising Conservative Kids is all about, like, how do you communicate in a way that is compelling, unflinching, and especially that your children can emulate. Because there's definitely pitfalls to doing this wrong. Pitfalls in terms of actually making your kid doubt the power of your argument, but then also tanking them and their own credibility if they model something that ends up being poisonous. So we have a lot of advice on that, but the bottom line is you've got to do it right and you've got to do it first, and they'll probably follow in your footsteps.
Katy, thank you so much for this conversation. I know you blow my mind with how much you're doing. You talked a little bit about where people can find you and some projects you have coming up that excite you, but remind the audience where they can connect with you, where they can find you, where your books are sold, and we'll end on that.
Books are all on Amazon, and if you don't want to feed the Amazon beast, you can get them anywhere else. The best place to follow our work is our Substack. If you go to Substack, then before us, subscribe. We will not waste your time. Everything that we put out twice a week is for the purpose of making you better at defending kids and educating your own children about the kind of questions that your kids are going to be facing. We are going to give you great content, great answers in a way that is easy to understand and makes you unassailable when it comes to these kinds of things. Like, we need an army of child defenders to rise up. So Then Before Us Substack is the best place. We're on all the social media. If you want my opinions about every single thing, you can go to X. That's where I put all of my opinions out there. And then the rest of it is more curated and appropriate from our social media manager, Jen Friesen. But we'd love to have you stay connected to us. We do have several major projects that children's lives will rise and fall based on whether or not we succeed. And we would absolutely love to have you along the ride with us for those.
Katy, thank you again for your time. All the best to you. God bless you with all you're doing. We will be praying for you and just so look forward to watching all you do.
Awesome. Thanks, Elise.